Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. For the last month or so, I've changed up the format of the podcast for several reasons. One is that I'm now forced to record remotely, which is quite unique for me. So I'm taking the opportunity to check in with not only some previous guests who I think can provide some encouraging words and feedback as we make our way through this pandemic, but I'm also bringing on some new guests to address topics that I think would be helpful. And today's guest is a new one to the podcast, and you're going to love her. My goal with this temporary new format of shorter episodes is to provide some helpful information and perhaps a bit of comfort and inspiration as we struggle with what's going on around us. Now, if you find yourself struggling and you need something to lift you up, the Be Bold Facebook group, and that is for ladies only, has been a wonderful way for us to encourage each other. Normally, we post the things we're doing to be bold, but over the past month, each day we've been posting things we're doing to stay happy and healthy right now. And that has been so much fun to share with everybody in the group. There are some great ideas that others are sharing, so please join us there. It's facebook.com/groups/BeBoldGroup. Okay, so today's guest is Janet Rhoton. Janet's been a mental health professional for 40 years and has worked in a variety of capacities, as you'll hear in this episode. Janet is a friend of mine, and we recently connected because a mutual friend of ours passed away. And while our friend did not die of the coronavirus, I believe her death was a result of it. As Janet calls it, it was a death of despair. Now, this kind of death has been a concern to me since this whole virus thing started to go down. I am so concerned about how people are going to make their way through this situation when people are feeling so much fear and uncertainty, and we have this crashing economy on top of it all. While Janet and I were corresponding with each other about our friend's passing, I started to realize that with her deep background in the field of mental health, she could really offer some great feedback and information to listeners. This health crisis is affecting everyone in one way or another. And as Janet says, we're already seeing a rise in mental health issues that are being triggered by or are a direct result of what's going on right now. And we're going to see those issues far and wide, from healthcare and other essential workers dealing with PTSD, to those in the service industry who feel pressure to work in unsafe environments just to keep their jobs, to those who have had to remain in abusive homes during the lockdown, to really those struggling financially. There's a wide range of people who are really suffering now and will suffer in the future. And it's going to be rough for a long time to come. I hope this episode with Janet helps either those in need of help now or in the future, or helps you to identify someone who may need help. This is a time when we all have to be watching out for each other. Janet lists emergency mental health services at the end of our conversation, and I'll link to those in the show notes as well. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Janet Rhoton. Janet, thanks so much for sitting down with me remotely and having a conversation with me. I really appreciate it. And the reason that we've come together, it's a sad reason, but hopefully other people will find some benefit here. So we have a mutual friend who died, and I think it was just over a little over a month ago. And it was just as things were beginning to ramp up with our health crisis. And while she didn't die of the virus, I looked at her death as her having died of a broken heart. Mm-hmm. She had a big heart for sure. And I just think like the world was too much for her. And I don't think that, I think as the months go on and even the year, I think that we're going to see more of this. And you used a term that we'll get into a little bit later. I want to say the term right now, but then we'll get into it a little bit later because I want to hear about your background. But the term that you used was death of despair. And I just think that's so poignant to maybe not what's going on this particular day, but I think what is to come in the future. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So just to kind of kick things off, can you just kind of run through your background and what you have done for a living and kind of what you bring to the table in terms of, I think, specifically the mental health community?
Sure. And thank you for having me on this podcast. My background is I'm a master's prepared licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington. I've been doing this I've been in the mental health community for about 40 years, but not master's level prepared. That was probably give or take 35 years. So I've been in the hospital setting, working as a clinician and a therapist with voluntary patients that were there, inpatient. I've worked with involuntary patients. Those are people that have been committed against their will because they're there really because they are a danger to self, danger to others. Actually, danger to property is one of the little known ones, but it has to be worth a lot of money, or gravely disabled. And that is an area that really got my attention just because mental health is interesting, but to add a forensic layer to it it's just really interesting.
When you say add a forensic layer to it, what do you mean by that?
Forensic is, law enforcement. And so you're taking away somebody's civil liberties. And often they have done something that the police officer can say, I can either send you to jail because you've committed a crime, or maybe what you did, assaulted your parents, was because you're mentally ill. And maybe that's not the best avenue. Let's bring in a designated mental health professional. Now they're called designated crisis responders, to evaluate whether you meet criteria and that you did this. It has to be because of a mental disorder. And then you can get the help you need. And that's a much better outcome than sending someone to jail, in my opinion. Although the jails are probably the biggest mental hospitals we have because we just don't have enough treatment, outpatient or inpatient. So they end up in jails. But you might have asked me what my background is. And so I have worked as the evaluator who did the legal paper, decided whether the person needed to be committed. I've also worked on the other end of it in the evaluation and treatment facility, treating those individuals. I've also was a supervisor at the King County Crisis Clinic. I did probably one of my more interesting jobs was I worked for Life Center Northwest, which is our organ procurement agency for this area. And I worked with families, whether they, for organ donation. I worked with the families before, during, and after the organ donation, whether they decided to donate an organ or not. I only did that a year. It was extreme privilege to be working with these families, but it was also incredibly sad. And I decided I needed to have a little bit more joy in my life. And then started working in the jails. I worked at first as a mental health professional working with...
You found more joy in the jails.
I did. Crazy.
Yeah.
And a unique population. It attracts a certain kind of person. And then I ended up managing the department, the Pierce County Crisis and Corrections, basically Pierce County Jail. It was very rewarding. Part of my job while I was there, it was definitely intermittent, but is probably one of the more satisfying parts of what I did was I did jury debriefing on cases where it was a particularly graphic, heinous act that was perpetrated. And these poor jurors, it's totally out of their everyday life. And then they have the added rule that they're not allowed to talk to anybody about it until the actual conviction. And so I talked with individuals that were struggling with what they've seen and heard and what they're feeling. And that was that was really very interesting and very rewarding.
Are you retired now?
I just retired in November.
Oh, gosh, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I would be an essential worker if I am not retired. So,
I was going to ask if it was a bit of a blessing that you're not working, or if you kind of wish that you were there helping out.
A little bit of both. I'm drawn to crisis. And so it's definitely mixed. But since I've been taking care of my granddaughter, there's no contest. I'm definitely,
yeah,
she wins.
excellent. Well, there's a lot of joy in that. So I'm glad you have found that the ultimate joy, I think. So good for you. Well, thanks for explaining the background. I do find it really fascinating, the kind of work that you've done. And I mean, really the kind of person that it takes to be that strong to kind of work in that environment. So thank you for all the work that you've done in the past. Can you explain to me this deaths of despair, the term that you used when our friend passed away? Of course, I am really concerned about what is happening right now in terms of the virus and the lives that we're losing, and the fact that these people are dying alone is just horrendous. And there is a lot of fear because for populations, especially for populations that are more at risk, there is a lot of fear around this. Even people who aren't at an at-risk category, there's still a lot of fear because it's just a lot of unknown. So we have a lot of that right now. What's also happening is, we have a crashed economy, right? It is a terrible time for everyone, most everyone. For people who have jobs, they're probably working more than they would like. And for people who don't have jobs, they are in economic situations that no one had dreamed of, right? Because it happened so quickly. This has happened so quickly. My big fear is that when this is over, we've put it behind us, there's going to be unimaginable hurt, despair, depression, maybe violence. I'm not really sure. I'm not qualified to say that for sure, but I just have a feeling.
It's happened already, the violence. The child abuse cases in the hospitals have spiked. They've already seen like way more than they normally see. Same thing with domestic violence, partner violence.
So that is already going up. And with the economy still going down, and I haven't seen, I think there was a little bit of hope that the stimulus package would help people out. And I've seen that a little bit, but I'm not seeing a lot of relief for businesses. There's just, I mean, to my shock, like, of course, there's not enough to go around, but I think there's going to be a lot of business failures, small business failures coming up as well. So I think it's going to be a tough time. And when I mentioned this to John, this kind of deaths of despair, and that I wanted to have this conversation with you, he said, well, gosh, like, don't you think maybe bringing this up will almost, these are my words, like almost give people permission to kind of fall into this trap. And I said, gosh, no, like it's something that really needs to be talked about. It's like depression, right? If we don't talk about it, then everybody feels alone. But if we can talk about what is to come, I think that there is some benefit to that, so that we do know what's to come and how we can get help and kind of how we can get by that. So would you talk just a little bit, since I've done all the talking around this, would you talk a little bit about that term deaths of despair and kind of how you see that and what you've seen in the past, and maybe because you are looking at statistics about what's going on right now, kind of what you might maybe predict, or what is typical in this kind of situation, what's to come?
Sure. Also, John is not alone. A lot of people feel like if you talk about it, it'll somehow make it worse and plant that idea in their heads. And it is a common misunderstanding. It actually does help alleviate the situation. And it's really, mental health has such a stigma. And I think one of the key parts of the deaths of despair is part of the solution to that is to tackle trying to destigmatizing mental health and substance disorders so that people can get treatment. Treatment itself, people might be ready and they're afraid of what people will think of them and if anyone will find out. And boy, self-care is where it's at. You really, I think, would be shocked at the number of people that once you just, even if you voluntarily disclose it, that you find out you're part of a very large club.
How did you just tie in the self-care? Do you mean once you disclose it, you mean disclosing mental health issues?
Yeah, and in all spectrums. So in other words, maybe you're not to the point where you need medication. Maybe you're not to the point where you need therapy. But if you're struggling emotionally, sometimes people are in this day and age of social media. We want to say that we're all doing great. And when we're not great, if you disclose to your friends and family that you're not well, that you're feeling depressed, you can have kind of a early intervention where if your troubles aren't too bad, you can come up with a plan where you'll be okay. And even to the point where you're able to help others. And on the more severe end of things, you can get to the point where, in fact, during this day and age, they've had to do telemedicine, and it's a pretty powerful tool. I prefer the ones where you can actually see the person because body language is a big part of it. Sometimes I have a friend who is doing telemedicine, but they don't do the video. They just do, on the phone, but that's better than nothing. So you can talk to someone. We have crisis lines 24/7, which I can give out before the end, which is also helpful. But it was actually the CDC that coined the term deaths of despair. And I believe it was a husband and wife team that were psychologists, or maybe they were MDs. They're statisticians, as much of what the CDC does to try to see what's going on. And they coined the term deaths of despair. And deaths of despair are basically suicide, drug overdose, alcohol poisoning, and alcohol-related liver disorders that people die from. For instance, on the latter, alcoholism, it's a long road to die from alcoholism. It's not overnight. The thing that they all have in common is that there's increased social isolation. And right now, during this pandemic, it makes them in a much higher risk category. And unfortunately, even in my life, I've had a time or two. And as social as I am, the thing I did was I isolated. So it's just such a, just like I'm a human being. It's like, oh, I don't want anybody to feel that I'm depressed. I'm a mental health professional. And it didn't work out for me. I needed to say, I need people. I need to force myself to go on a walk, be with other people. And it was a godsend. But not everybody can kind of look in the mirror and say, oh, this isn't working. I need to do something different. We're social animals. So if our family, and that's why we rely on our family and friends too, that can reach out and say, how are you doing? How are you really doing? And make a space for someone to say, I'm not okay. Not that you're inviting it, not that you want them to say they're not okay, but make it okay to be not okay. And then you can go forward and give some helpful tips. I've been hearing so many helpful tips out there from you, from TV announcements, and they're all true. I always think of the first time I made the awareness of good, self-care was when I was, a teenager, and learned about the YMCA triangle, which is body, mind, and spirit. And I always felt like, they got something going on there. And I feel like it's true today. I mean, we hear it in many different avenues, but if you have good thoughts, saying that this is kind of good, helpful tips, what you're grateful for, you write it down, that you make sure that you exercise. I'm a big fan of going outdoors. You're part of a large world. And even if it's raining or snowing or cold, being outdoors is always better than being indoors. Just even for, walk around the block.
Have you seen the videos of the folks in, I think it's Italy, there might be somebody in Spain too, who's gotten a lot of social media recognition, that he ran a marathon on his balcony. Just went back and forth. Yeah. So he just went back and forth until he hit 26.2. And so even in extreme isolation, at least here in Washington state, we can still get outside as long as we're practicing social distancing. But even someone who can just go out on his balcony, he's still figuring out a way to do an extreme event, a marathon.
A great example. Yeah, there's really no limits. If you want to do it, you can do it.
Just got to figure it out. Yeah, be creative with it. So what might happen when we finally do put this behind us? Like, I totally get what you're saying, that early intervention is a real key part of this, and the ability to admit to others that we are struggling, that we're having a problem. And that is going to be part of the self-care, right? That's what you're saying, is that's going to be part of your self-care. What do you expect that might happen once this is behind us, whether it's in a few weeks? There might be a lifting of some restrictions as early as a few weeks, like here in Washington state, or months this summer or in the next year. Kind of, is there any precedent to look at a pattern of what might happen in the coming months and year?
I believe it's happening now. I believe they've already reported that alcohol sales is going up, and my belief, I don't have the stats on it.
Part of it is it's like one of the only stores that's open.
Exactly. Who knew it was?
It's essential.
I thought it was just really funny. I was just thinking, oh, interesting. So not everybody is abusing alcohol, but those that struggle with it, I'm sure, are consuming more, and they're isolated. And it's the perfect recipe for disaster, really. And I think the same goes for using too much drugs. When I say too much, it can be, the kind that are prescribed to you. A lot of people overdose from prescribed drugs that they're misusing, as well as recreational or illegal drugs. And depression that causes someone to take their own lives. I'm curious of what the stats will come out, but my hunch is that it started already, because this business has been going on for a while, which is very scary. And I think that it's been nice to know that, again, in the media, that people are trying to, give helpful tools, and, the use of Zoom and, self-care, all these messages to help take care of yourself. I think it all helps, but we'll see what happens to folks that we're struggling to begin with. I think of our vets. My goodness, you have post-traumatic syndrome. And this is, again, a recipe that is not a good one for living in isolation like this. Mm-hmm. And again, you can do things through media to reach out, but not everybody does what they think they need. I think it's already happening. I do know from talking to a couple of friends and family that I was curious how the telemedicine was working, and for just mental health. Like, are they going to ignore the mental health? And they're not. They're doing telemedicine, which I feel like is smart and immediate. And I think that's great. I mean, that's some good news.
Right. And you actually bring up a really good point, because here I am expecting something to happen down the road, and you're saying it already is happening. Like you said earlier, that there is more child abuse. There's cases coming into the hospitals, and there's more domestic violence, and more people are drinking. And we don't have statistics, I don't think, on the drugs per se, but we can probably make a pretty good assumption that drug use, both prescribed and illegal, has increased. One of the things that you had mentioned to me earlier when we were just kind of exchanging some ideas around this is that you said smaller decisions can lead to one's undoing. And I thought that was really, really golden, because one way to look at that, and I just think of it in my own life, is that if I don't get up and work out first thing in the morning, when I get up and I work out first thing in the morning, it kind of sets the tone for the whole day. and it changes and improves upon my day. Like it just
Right.
helps my day get better. But if I do make a bad decision, whether that's eating chocolate or just not having something healthy, then I'm more apt to just throw up my hands and say, what the hell? Like that day is a loss.
Right.
Of course, we're talking about something that's much more serious, but that's the one thing that I can kind of relate to. But we're talking about one small bad decision can actually lead to something more critical than that, and it's really important to kind of get a handle on that, isn't it?
It is. That's a perfect example, and your example was very relatable. And I always think that good decisions lead to, it's a spiral. It leads to more good decisions, and a bad decision leads to more bad decisions. It certainly is in my life, especially with exercise and eating, and so you look at someone who is doing everything right, and a good example is I love to exercise. I love to move. It's just more about my mental health than probably my physical health, and good for me that it helps out with physical stuff too. So I decided to start running. And so I'm running. And, I run 6 miles a day. And then I go on a trip to Papua New Guinea for 12 days. And then I never run again. Never ran again.
You broke the cycle.
I broke the cycle. I'm a creature of habit. And maybe I'll run tomorrow, Beth. But I do other things. I'm
going to check in with you to make sure you do. I'm going to text you tomorrow to make sure you go for at least a 1 mile run.
Yeah, I like it. But sometimes it's like you have a good reason to stop doing something that was good for you, that you enjoyed, because there's a bigger picture that you want to experience. And then it's just getting back to that routine. And I guess the other thing I want to say is routine helps. Having a structure. I don't know if you said it on the show, but I know that you've said it other places, that having a structure helps rather than let's say you're not working. Retirees are also at a big risk factor for suicide and drinking too much and all that. It's all connected. But to say, I'm not going to sleep in past 7. I'm not going to stay up late. I'm not going to, drink during the week. Whatever your structure is.
I'm actually going to get dressed.
I'm going to get dressed, or put your shoes on. I have a friend who is on Facebook with me, and she about halfway into the quarantine learned that if you have your shoes on and you're working from home, that you'll work better. So what she does is she texts her shoes every morning. And it's great because often it's like stilettos or, ridiculous boots or whatever. So adding some humor to it. Mm-hmm. So, you figure out some tip and then you pass it on, but I don't want to lose the thread, which is structure and routine is your friend. And just because you have all this free time, you'll do better. Getting the other part of this, we talked about anxiety and depression, but the third thing, which is huge, is insomnia. Also one of the leading, and I can understand, because if you are fearful or angry, you're going to have trouble sleeping. If you're anxious, you're going to have trouble sleeping. A lot of times people have this kind of running tape in their head, and that's why they can't sleep at night.
You talked earlier about kind of normalizing mental health issues just so that it's not stigmatized, which I think is great. And there are a couple things that come up to me, like that I think are very much talked about, but maybe aren't completely normalized right now. And that's both anxiety and depression. Would you say that those kind of top the list of what maybe people are going through right now?
I think they're the two top symptoms of what people are going through. And as a result of probably those, is it also insomnia, which is again a symptom. And just to speak a little bit about those two symptoms and delve in a little bit about what can help with the third, is depression is a very self-centered disorder. I hate to use the word disease, so we'll just say disorder. You are thinking about yourself, you're inward. You could have the house on fire in a severe case, and you're not going to, I'm just being dramatic here, you don't really notice it or care because you're too worried about yourself. And that is why one of the things that's helpful for people that suffer from depression they'll always say, do something for someone else because it's outward. It's outward. If you're busy washing the floors or taking care of a baby, you're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about that other person. And we're social creatures, and it's gratifying that you're helping. Helping is a nice thing to feel, but also it will take you out of yourself if you think about someone else. Anxiety is a future worry. So, one of the things that's helpful for people that are anxious is to stay in the moment. Even if the present moment is a little scary, it's never as scary as what you worry about. So, that means sometimes it's like, just get through the day. If that's too big of a chunk of time to hang on to, saying, I don't think I can get through the day, you say, I'm going to get through the next hour. If that's too big, I'm going to get through the next minute. You just break it down. And I've never really run into anybody who says, I can't get through the next minute or the next 5 minutes. So staying present and focused, paying attention to your surroundings, your senses, that will help kind of ground you into the present where you won't be anxious.
I heard something really interesting. I just heard this yesterday too, where the sale of puzzles has gone crazy. So everybody's home doing puzzles.
Right.
And someone said it's a really grounding thing, because when you are focused on looking for that part of the building or that piece of the sky, there's nothing else on your mind except for where is that piece amongst everything else. And I thought, that's brilliant. No wonder it's such a relaxing thing.
And it's tactile too. And you usually do a puzzle with someone else, not always, but often. And the socialization part with your family. That's also something we didn't really touch on. The people that are at home with their kids and still have to work. That's, although it might be precious time with their family, it can also be very stressful. So I've talked a lot about stress.
So then insomnia, let's talk about third piece of it is insomnia and what happens to a person then.
Well, the news is very fear-based. It's also informative, but the people that I've spoken to that are they're drawn to the news because they want to know, they don't want to miss out, find themselves becoming more and more anxious. And so a good strategy for that is you want to still be informed, is you say, I'm only going to check in on the news, watch the news in the morning and at night. Or what I think is just once a day. Don't do it at bedtime, do it in the morning. And then an extra piece, I believe, is don't have it in video form. In other words, read it. When you read something, you can control it. Like, oh, I don't want to go here. I'm not going to read this. This is not going to be helpful to me. So I think it's important to be responsible and informed, but limit your contact. Just, once a day, read it in the morning. That will be helpful because if you are watching it right at night, it's going to be difficult to sleep if you are suffering from that. The other thing is a lot of people use alcohol to fall asleep. They go, oh no, I can drink. It doesn't disturb my sleep. I fall asleep right away. I pass out. But you might pass out, but then it's one of the leading causes for sleep disturbance. So if you're having trouble sleeping, although it might seem counterintuitive, don't drink. Just don't do it. You would be surprised at how your sleep will improve if you don't drink.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me that very thing where people use it to fall asleep, but then the way that it's processed in your body, it'll wake you up at some point because it's processing in your liver, and it'll wake you up either because you have to go to the bathroom or just because your liver is waking up and processing it by the time it gets at 4:00 in the morning or so. That it's often said. So right. Yeah, you're not sleeping well.
And the other thing is really, again, a really easy thing is exercise is this magic bullet. If you have trouble sleeping and you exercised during the day, they recommend not exercising right before bed because then it'll disturb it. But if you exercise during the day, your sleep will improve. The other thing is if you are lethargic, exercise will make you more alert and give you the energy you need. So exercise.
Yeah,
even
absolutely.
a walk, just a walk.
Good for mental and physical health for sure.
Well, I was going to say one other thing is from my time at the crisis clinic, one of the tips that people seem to really grasp onto and report back that it was helpful is take a bath. Take a bath right before bed. It slows the body down, have a cup of tea, and that's also nice. I always like to add that.
Yeah, it's a great self-care tip. Oh, earlier in the episode, you mentioned that you have some information in terms of crisis hotlines and numbers. Could you provide those to me? And I'll
Sure.
put those in the show notes as well.
Okay. One is for really just finding, food and just helpful services. And that's just, you can either dial 211.org or call 211. The other thing is a disaster distress helpline, and that is 1-800-985-5990. And most communities have their own kind of local crisis clinic, but this covers everything. And what's nice is if you call them, they'll be able to refer you to either a local one or something more specific. They have lines for the LGBTQ community, for, more specific ones. Mm-hmm. And then there's also warm lines, which is really kind of a sweet idea. It's for those people that are feeling a little blue. They're not in crisis. They're not ready to kill themselves or hurt anybody else, but they really feel like, to get through the night, I will just be better off if I talked with a mental health professional. And so they can refer you to those as well.
Wow, warm line. That's wonderful. As opposed to hotline. Yeah, that's great. Super. I will include all of that in the show notes. And then I will also say just that if anybody does need help, they can always email me and I can do what I can to put them in touch with someone at Beth at she'sboldpodcast.com. And I'm happy to help kind of facilitate. I've done that with other people that, just in my larger community, just have said, call me.
Yeah, right.
Just to chat. And this was not having to do with our current situation, but just in general, I want to be open to people and be able to help out where I can. So thanks for that additional information.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else that either I didn't ask or that you would like to add that might be helpful for people as they navigate through this time?
What pops in my head is an old German proverb. I believe it's a German proverb. And it is something to the effect of burdens shared are cut in half, joy shared are doubled. And I feel like it's just a good kind of recipe, simple recipe for life, that we're social creatures. And if we're going through a tough time and we share it with people that care and will listen, we will feel better. And I think that's an important factor to be aware of, and as well as the good stuff. I think that during this pandemic, as much as we've had all these kind of horrible things happening to us, there's always a really nice upside, and you see acts of kindness and a lot of humor. And I always say, pass on the humor, keep the kindness going, and don't keep that part a secret. I think it just helps your overall outlook.
You sent me a hilarious video that I'll see if I can add that to the show notes somehow. And it was a laugh out loud moment for me.
Good.
For sure. So
it's pretty funny.
I won't give it away to listeners, but I'll see what I can do about sharing that with people, because that was great. So yeah, that kind of humor. I find myself listening to. I'm a big fan of course, podcasts, but I listen to Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. And I was never I'm not a Conan TV watcher. Like I don't watch traditional TV, but this podcast is hilarious. And I just find myself, if I'm out for a run, sometimes I'm stopped and I'm doubled over in laughter listening to this. Or this morning I was doing some warm-ups and I was just rolling on the floor, like crying, laughing.
Oh, so I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it's really great. It's so nice to have that joy. Listen to the Dana Carvey episode, like start with that. It's one of the earlier ones, but it'll have you doubled over, just in laughter. It's really great. So Janet, thanks so much for your time and your insight and your wisdom and the tips and information. Super helpful just to know that we have the ability to take some control over what our daily experience is. I think so much we feel out of control, and that is especially the case if we're hitting the refresh button on the news or tuning into NPR all day, because it's not, I mean, bad news sells, right? Good news
Right.
doesn't. So that's pretty much all that we're going to be exposed to if we keep doing that. So taking control, I think, is so important, and the information and the tips that you've given just do that. It's just every day is self-care.
Self-care, self-care.
Yeah.
And I always think of people that have little ones around, that if you're in a position where you have other people looking up to you, if you have good self-care, role modeling is way more effective than telling someone what to do. So good self-care influences other positive self-care as well.
Janet, thanks again so much.
You bet,
Appreciate
you bet.
it.
Thanks, Beth. Take care.
I'm going to repeat that information that Janet gave at the end there. Online, you can check out 211.org, or you can call 211 from your phone. You can also call the Disaster Distress Helpline at 1-800-985-5990, and they will give you a referral for any sort of special help that you might need. I'm going to add to Janet's list the U.S. Suicide Hotline, and that is 800-273-TALK. So 1-800-273-8255. For more recent episodes that are specifically about coping during this time of a pandemic, check out episodes 121 with coach and athlete Sabrina Sayer, 122 with Dr. Robin Benson, and episode number 123 with Janelle McCauley, who is, among other things, a retired combat veteran and a motivational speaker. You can find those and all of my other episodes at shesboldpodcast.com/episodes, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing the uplifting stories from my guests, go to patreon.com/bebold. Patreon supporters get to submit questions for me to ask guests and become part of our private Facebook group, and that is ladies only. They also get access to bonus content, including questions I ask of the guest. To keep up with me and all of my travels, when there is traveling to be done, you can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm on Instagram at both Beth Whitwa, BETHWHITWA, and Wandergal. Feel free to leave a message or a question at 877-280-5170. I do love feedback. You can also email me at beth@shesboldpodcast.com. Ladies, don't forget to join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. And there is a lot of sharing going on there right now, so do check it out. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.